Hello. Why isn't my... Oh, come on. Hold on. Hi, Mir. This is a great sign. Give me... give me 1 second. I'll be right back. I'm so sorry. There we go. That's better. Alright. Sorry about that, guys. Um... Hello, hello. How are we all doing today? I hope we can actually hear the rain this time. I know we couldn't actually hear it last week. Which was my bad. Hee hee. But hopefully we got that up and working this time. My week has been a bit wild. So it snowed. Uh, but it only snowed for like a day, and that was that Saturday that I had to cancel stream. Um, and then it like stayed snowy for maybe a day, and then it all kind of turned to ice. So it's just been super icy out, and we haven't really been able to go anywhere. Um, it's not too cold though. I have been trying to fix my sleep schedule. I'm so EB right now. I'm very tired. So today's gonna be a shorter stream because, and fixing sleep schedule. We're trying out different sleep meds to help with the insomnia stuff. And it is going. We're doing our best out here. Anyway, so last week we finished. We left off on chapter 6. Sophie was, I mean, not like was pretty much accepted into Howl's Moving Castle. In the sense that like Hal never really made it explicitly clear, but he never kicked her out. So she's kind of their unofficial cleaning lady now. Calcifer and Michael are not happy about this. But they can't get Howl to do anything about it, so they're just kind of stuck there. Let's see, chapter 5 was full of just thanks, Mir. Full of just her cleaning. She tried to get into Howl's room and then the yard, and that's when Howl stopped her and was like, no, you've caused enough havoc everywhere else. You leave my room alone. She also has that deal with Calcifer, where it's if she breaks Calcifer's and Howl's bargain and finds out what it is, then he'll break the curse on her. And that's kind of where we left off. Oh, I don't have tea with me today, but I have coffee. It's a lavender oat milk coffee. Well, mostly oat milk. We kind of ran out of oat milk, so I just used milk for the rest of it, which I'm not supposed to do because I'm allergic to dairy. But that's fine. Don't worry. Don't worry about it. Okay. How is the audio, by the way? I hope there is no music, but there is rain. I really hope we can actually hear the rain this week. I just want to make sure the rain isn't like too loud or too quiet, you know? Oh, cool. Also, hello. Oh, you don't. Oh, okay. So we have mixed mixed reports. uh hmm. That siren in the background is not part of the rain. I just live in the middle of a city. So I'll try turning up the rain just a bit. It's kind of like that white noise kind of thundering thing. I'm trying to still keep it in the green, you know, I don't want it to get too loud where it's like up into like the yellow area. But I also want to make sure that you guys can hear it. The wind? Are you outside? Are you listening to me outside? Okay. Yeah. I'll just keep it at this volume. But if it's too loud, you guys just let me know, okay? Alright. I'm gonna go ahead and get started with Chapter 6, though. Chapter 6, in which Howl expresses his feelings with green slime. Howl did not go out that day, nor for the next few days. Sophie sat quietly in the chair by the hearth, keeping out of his way and thinking. She saw that, much as Howl deserved it, she had been taking out her feelings on the castle when she was really angry with the Witch of the Waste. And she was a little upset at the thought that she was here on false pretenses. Howl might think Calcifer liked her, but Sophie knew Calcifer had simply seized on the chance to make a bargain with her. Sophie rather thought she had let Calcifer down. This state of mind did not last. Sophie discovered a pile of Michael's clothes that needed mending. She fetched out a thimble, scissors, and thread from her sewing pocket and set to work. By that evening, she was cheerful enough to join in Calcifer's silly little song about saucepans. Happy in your work? Howl said sarcastically. I need more to do, Sophie said. My old suit needs mending. If you have to feel busy. This seemed to mean that Howl was no longer annoyed. Sophie was relieved. She had been almost frightened that morning. It was clear that Howl had not yet caught the girl he was after. Sophie listened to Michael asking rather obvious questions about it, and Howl slithering neatly out of answering any of them. He is a slitherer outer, Sophie murmured to a pair of Michael's socks. Can't face his own wickedness. She watched Howl being restlessly busy in order to hide his discontent. That was something Sophie understood rather well. At the bench, Howl worked a good deal harder and faster than Michael, putting spells together in an expert but slapdash way. From the look on Michael's face, most of the spells were both unusual and hard to do. But Howl would leave a spell midway and dash up to his bedroom to look after something hidden, and no doubt sinister, going on up there, and then shortly race out into the yard to tender with a large spell out there. Sophie opened the door a crack and was rather amazed to see the elegant wizard, kneeling in the mud with his long sleeves tied together behind his neck to keep them out of the way, while he carefully heaved a triangle of greasy metal into a special framework of some kind. That spell was for the king. Another overdressed and scented messenger arrived with a letter and a long, long speech in which he wondered if Hal could possibly spare time, no doubt valuably employed in other ways, to bend his powerful and ingenious mind to a small problem experienced by his royal majesty, to wit, how an army might get its heavy wagons through marsh and rough ground. Howl was wonderfully polite and long-winded in reply. He said no, but the messenger spoke for a further half hour, at the end of which he and Howl bowed to one another, and Howl agreed to do the spell. This is a bit ominous, Howl said to Michael when the messenger had gone. What did Solomon have to get himself lost in the waste for? The king seems to think I'll do instead. He wasn't as inventive as you, by all accounts, Michael said. I'm too patient and too polite, Howl said gloomily. I should have overcharged him even more. Howl was equally patient and polite with customers from Port Haven, but, as Michael anxiously pointed out, the trouble was that Howl did not charge these people enough. This was after Howl had listened for an hour to the reasons why a seaman's wife could not pay him a penny, yet, and then promised to see. Oh boy. I'm gonna try this sentence over again. This was after Howl had listened for an hour to the reasons why a seaman's wife could not pay him a penny yen, and then promised to see Captain a wind spell for almost nothing. Howl eluded Michael's arguments by giving him a magic lesson. Sophie sewed buttons on Michael's shirts and listened to Howl going through a spell with Michael. I know I'm slapdash, he was saying, but there's no need for you to copy me. Always read it right through, carefully, first. The shape of it should tell you a lot, whether it's self-fulfilling or self-discovering, or a simple incantation, or mixed action and speech. When you've decided that, go through again and decide which bits mean what they say and which bits are as a puzzle. You're getting on to the more powerful kinds now. You'll find every spell of power has at least one deliberate mistake or mystery in it to prevent accidents. You have to spot those. Now take this spell. Listening to Michael's halting replies to Howl's questions, and watching Howl scribble marks on the paper with a strange, everlasting quill pen, Sophie realized that she could learn a lot too. It dawned on her that if Martha could discover the spell to swap herself and Letty about at Miss Fairfax's, then she ought to be able to do the same here. With a bit of luck, there might be no need to rely on Calcifer. When Howl was satisfied that Michael had forgotten all about how much or little he charged people in Port Haven, he took him out into the yard to help with the king's spell. Sophie creaked to her feet and hobbled to the bench. The spell was clear enough, but Howl's scrawled remarks defeated her. I've never seen such writing, she grumbled to the human skull. Does he use a pen or a poker? She sorted eagerly through every scrap of paper on the bench, examined examined the powders and liquids in the crooked jars. Yes, let's admit it, she told the skull. I snoop, and I have my proper reward. I can find out how to cure foul pest and abate whooping cough, rise a wind, and remove hairs from the face. If Martha had found this lot, she'd still be at Miss Fairfax's. Howl, it seemed to Sophie, went and examined all the things she had moved when he came in from the yard. But that seemed to be only restlessness. He seemed not to know what to do with himself after that. Sophie heard him roving up and down during the night. He was only an hour in the bathroom the next morning. He seemed not to be able to contain himself while Michael put on his best plum velvet suit. Plum velvet suit. That sounds really interesting. I kind of want to see that. They have a lot of very, kind of fantastical sort of dress and costume. I love to, I don't know, maybe we'll do that this week for our art stream. Just design a plum velvet suit. Michael put on his best plum velvet suit, ready to go to the palace in Kingsbury, and then the two of them wrapped the bulky spell up in golden paper. The spell must have been surprisingly light for its size. Michael could carry it on his own easily, with both his arms wrapped around it. Howl turned the knob over the door, read down for him, and sent him out on the street among the painted houses. They're expecting it, Howl said. You should only have to wait most of the morning. Then tell them a child could work it. Show them. And when you come back, I'll have a spell of power for you to get to work on. So long. He shut the door and roved around the room again. My feet itch, he said suddenly. I'm going for a walk on the hills. Tell Michael the spell I promised him is on the bench, and here's for you to keep busy with. Sophie found a gray and scarlet suit, as fancy as the blue and silver one, dropped into her lap from nowhere. Howl, meanwhile, picked up his guitar from its corner and turned the doorknob green down, and stepped out among the scuttling heather above Market Chipping. His feet itch, grumbled oh wait, that's Calcifer. His feet itch, grumbled Calcifer. There's a fog down in Port Haven. Calcifer was low among his logs, moving uneasily this way and that to avoid drips in the chimney. How does he think I feel, stuck in a damp grate like this? Then you'll have to give me a hint, at least, about how to break our contract, Sophie said, shaking out the gray and scarlet suit. Goodness, you're a fine suit, even if you are a bit worn. Built to pull in the girls, aren't you? I have given you a hint, Calcifer fizzed. Then you'll have to give it to me again. I didn't catch it, Sophie said, as she laid the suit and hobbled to the door. If I give you a hint and tell you it's a hint, it will be information, and I'm not allowed to give that, Calcifer said. Where are you going? To do something I don't dare to do until they were both out, Sophie said. She twisted the square knob over the door until the black blob pointed downward. Then she opened the door. There was nothing outside. It was neither black, nor gray, nor white. It was not thick or transparent. It did not move. It had no smell and no feel. When Sophie put a very cautious finger into it, it was neither hot nor cold. It felt of nothing. It seemed utterly and completely nothing. What is this? She asked Calcifer. Calcifer was as interested as Sophie, his blue face leaning right out of the grate to see the door. He had forgotten the fog. I don't know, he whispered. I only maintain it. All I know is that it's on the side of the castle and that no one can walk around. It feels quite far away. It feels beyond the moon, said Sophie. She shut the door and turned the knob grain downward. She hesitated a minute and then started to hobble to the stairs. "He's locked it," said Calcifer. "He told me to tell you if you tried to snoop again." "Oh," Sophie said. "What has he got up there?" "I have no idea," said Calcifer. "I don't know anything about upstairs. If only you knew how frustrating it is. I can't even really see outside the castle." Oh boy, my foot just fell asleep. Ow, 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 frick, ow, sorry. Oh god, hold on. Okay, I think we're good now, sorry. Okay. If you only knew how frustrating it is. I can't even really see outside the castle. Only enough to see what direction I'm going in. Sophie, feeling equally frustrated, sat down and began mending the gray and scarlet suit. Michael came in quite soon after that. "The king saw me at once," he said. He looked around the room. His eyes went to the empty corner where the guitar usually stood. "Oh no," he said. "Not the lady friend again. I thought she'd fallen in love with him, and that was all over days ago. What's keeping her?" Calcifer fizzed wickedly. "You got the sign wrongs. Heartless Howl is finding this lady rather tough. He decided to leave her alone for a few days to see if that would help, that's all." "Bother," Michael said. "That's bound to mean trouble. And here I was hoping Howl was almost sensible again." Sophie banged the suit down on her knees. "Really," she said, "how can you both talk like that about such utter wickedness? At least, I suppose I can't blame Calcifer since he's an evil demon. But you, Michael!" I don't think I'm evil," Calcifer protested. "But I'm not calm about it if that's what you think," Michael said. "If you knew the trouble we've had because Howl will keep falling in love like this, we've had lawsuits, and suitors with swords, and mothers with rolling pins, and fathers and uncles with cudgels, and aunts. Aunts are terrible. They go for you with hat pins. But the worst is when the girl herself finds out where Howl lives and turns up at the door, crying and miserable. Howl goes out through the back door, and Calcifer and I have to deal with them." "I hate the unhappy ones," Calcifer said. "They drip on me. I'd rather have them get angry." "Now let's get this straight," Sophie said, clenching her fist knobbly in red satin. "What does Howl do to these poor females? I was told that he ate their hearts and took their souls away." Michael laughed uncomfortably. Then you must come from market shipping. Howl sent me down there to blacken his name when we first set up the castle. I said that sort of thing. It's what aunts usually say. It's only true in a manner of speaking." "Howl's very fickle," said Calcifer. "He's only interested until the girl falls in love with him. Then he can't be bothered with her." "But he can't rest until he's made her love him," Michael said eagerly. "You can't get any sense out of him until he has. I always look forward to the time when the girl falls for him. Things get better after then." "Until they track him down," said Calcifer. "You'd think he'd have the sense to give them a false name," Sophie said scornfully. The scorn was to hide the fact that she was feeling somewhat foolish. "Oh, he always does," Michael said. "He loves giving false names and posing as things. He does it even when he's not courting girls. Haven't you noticed that he's Sorcerer Jenkin in Port Haven and Wizard Pendragon in Kingsbury, as well as Horrible Howl in the castle?" Sophie had not noticed, which made her feel more foolish still. And feeling foolish made her angry. "Well, I think it's wicked, going around making poor girls unhappy," she said. "It's heartless and pointless." He's made that way," said Calcifer. Michael pulled a three-legged stool up to the fire and sat on it while Sophie sewed, telling her of Howl's conquest and some of the trouble that had happened afterward. Sophie muttered at the fine suit, and she still felt very foolish. So you ate hearts, did you, Suit? Why do have the why do aunts put things so oddly when they talk about their nieces? Probably fancied you themselves, my good Suit. How do you feel if they're raging on after you, eh? As Michael told her the story of a particular aunt he had in mind, it occurred to Sophie that it was probably just as well the rumors of Howl had come to market chipping in those words. She could imagine a strong-minded girl like Letty otherwise getting very interested in Howl and ending up very unhappy. Michael had just suggested lunch, and Calcifer, as usual, had groaned when Howl flung the door open and came in more discontented than ever. Something to eat, said Sophie. No, said Howl. Hot water in the bathroom, Calcifer. He stood moodily in the bathroom door a moment. Sophie, have you tidied this shelf of spells in here by any chance? Sophie felt more foolish than ever. Nothing would have possessed her to admit that she had gone through all of those packets and jars looking for pieces of girl. I haven't touched a thing. I haven't touched a thing, she replied virtuously as she went to get the frying pan. I hope you didn't, Michael said uneasily as the bathroom door slammed. Rinsings and gushings came from the bathroom while Sophie fried lunch. He's using a lot of hot water, Calcifer said from under the pan. I think he's tinting his hair. I hope you left the hair spells alone. For a plain man with mud-colored hair, he's terribly vain about his looks. Oh, shut up, snapped Sophie. I put everything back just where I found it. She was so cross that she emptied the pan of eggs and bacon over Calcifer. Calcifer, of course, ate them with enormous enthusiasm and much flaring and gobbling. Sophie fried more over the spitting flames. She and Michael ate them. They were clearing away, and Calcifer was running his blue tongue around his purple lips when the bathroom door crashed open and Howl shot out, wailing with despair. Look at this! He shouted. Look at it! What has that one-woman force of chaos done to these spells? Sophie and Michael whirled around and looked at Howl. His hair was wet, but apart from that, neither of them could see that it looked any different. If you mean me, Sophie began. I do mean you! Look! Howl shrieked. He sat down with a lump on the three-legged stool and jabbed his wet head with a finger. Look, survey, inspect, my hair is ruined. I look like a pan of bacon and eggs. Michael and Sophie bent nervously over Howl's head. It was the same unusual flaxen color right to the roots. The only difference might have been a slight, very slight, trace of red. Sophie found that agreeable. It reminded her of the color of her own hair. Should have been. I think it's very nice, she said. Nice! Screamed Howl. You would! You did it on purpose. You couldn't rest until you made me miserable, too. Look at it. It's ginger. I shall have to hide it until it's grown out. He spread his arms out passionately. Despair, he yelled. Anguish, horror. The room turned dim. Huge, cloudy human-looking shapes bellied up in all four corners and advanced on Sophie and Michael, howling as they came. The howls began as moaning horror and went up to despairing brays and then up again to screams of pain and terror. Sophie pressed her hands to her ears, but the screams pressed through her hands, louder and louder still, the more horrible every second. Calcifer shrank hurriedly down into the grate and flickered his way under his lowest log. Michael grabbed Sophie by her elbow and dragged her to the door. He spun the knob, blew down, kicked the door open, and got them both out into the street in Port Haven as fast as he could. The noise was almost as horrible out there. Doors were opening all down the road, and people were running out with their hands over their ears. Ought we to leave him alone in that state? Sophie quavered. Yes, said Michael. If you think it's your fault, then definitely. They hurried through the town, pursued by throbbing screams. Quite a crowd came with them, in spite of the fact that the fog had now become a seeping sea drizzle. Everyone made for the harbor or the sands, where the noise seemed easier to bear. The gray vastness of the sea soaked it up a little. Everyone stood in damp huddles, looking out at the misty white horizon and the dripping ropes on the moored ships while the noise became a gigantic, heartbroken sobbing. Sophie reflected that she was seeing the sea close for the first time in her life. It was a pity that she was not enjoying it more. The sobs died away to a vast, miserable sighs and then to silence. People began cautiously to go back into the town. Some of them came up timidly to Sophie. "Is something wrong with the poor sorcerer, Miss Witch?" "He's a little unhappy today," Michael said. "Come on, I think we can risk going back now." As they went along to the stone quayside, several sailors called out anxiously from the moored ships, wanting to know if the noise meant storms or bad luck. "Not at all. Not at all," Sophie called back. "It's all over now." But it was not. They came back to the wizard's house, which was an ordinary crooked little building from the outside that Sophie would not have recognized if Michael had not been with her. Michael opened the shabby little door rather cautiously. Inside, Howl was still sitting on the stool. He sat in an attitude of utter despair. He was covered all over in thick, green slime. There were horrendous, dramatic, violent quantities of green slime. Oodles of it. It covered Howl completely. It draped his head and shoulders in sticky dollops, heaping on his knees and hands, trickling in globs down to his legs, and dripping off the stool in sticky strands. It was in oozing ponds and crawling pools over most of the floor. Long fingers of it had crept into the hearth. It smelled vile. "Save me!" Calcifer cried in a hoarse whisper. He was down to two desperately flickering small flames. "This stuff is going to put me out!" Sophie held up her skirt and marched as near as Howl as she could get, which was not very near. "Stop it!" she said. "Stop it at once! You are behaving just like a baby." Howl did not move or answer. His face stared from behind the slime, white and tragic and wide-eyed. "What shall we do? Is he dead?" Michael asked, jittering beside the door. Michael was a nice boy, Sophie thought, but a bit helpless in a crisis. "No, of course he isn't," she said. "If it wasn't for Calcifer, he could behave like a jellied eel all day for all I care. Open the bathroom door." While Michael was working his way between pools of slime to the bathroom, Sophie threw her apron into the hearth to stop more of the stuff getting near Calcifer, and snatched up the shovel. She scooped up loads of ash and dumped them in the biggest pools of slime. It hissed violently. The room filled with steam and smelled worse than ever. Sophie furled up her sleeves, bent her back to get a good purchase on the wizard's slimy knees, and pushed Howl, stool and all, towards the bathroom. Her feet slipped and skidded on the slime, but of course the ooziness helped the stool move too. Michael came and pulled Howl's slime-draped sleeve. Together, they trundled him to the bathroom. There, since Howl still refused to move, they shunted him into the shower stall. "Hot water, Calcifer," Sophie panted grimly. "Very hot." It took an hour to wash the slime off Howl. It took Michael another hour to persuade Howl to get off the stool and into dry clothes. Luckily, the gray and scarlet suit Sophie had just mended had been draped over the back of the chair, out of the way of the slime. The blue and silver suit was ruined. Sophie told Michael to put it in the bath to soak. Meanwhile, mumbling and grumbling, she fetched more hot water. She turned the doorknob green down and swept all the slime out into the moors. The castle left a trail like a snail in the heather, but it was an easy way to get rid of the slime. There were some advantages to living in a moving castle. Sophie thought as she washed the floor. She wondered if Howl's noises had been coming from the castle too, in which case she pitied the folk of Market Chipping. By this time, Sophie was tired and cross. She knew the green slime was Howl's revenge on her, and she was not at all prepared to be sympathetic. sympathetic when Michael finally led Howl forth from the bathroom, clothed in grey and scarlet, and sat him tenderly in the chair by the hearth. "That was plain stupid," Calcifer sputtered, but with a sentimental smile. Oh, wait, nope, skip the page. "That was plain stupid," Calcifer said. "Are you trying to get rid of the best part of your magic or something?" Hal took no notice. He just sat, looking tragic and shivering. "I can't get him to speak," Michael whispered miserably. "It's just a tantrum," Sophie said. Martha and Letty were good at having tantrums too. She knew how to deal with those. On the other hand, it is quite a risk to spank a wizard for getting hysterical about his hair. You shouldn't spank kids anyway. Anyway, Sophie's experience told her that the tantrums were seldom about the thing they appear to be about. She made Calcifer move over so that she could balance a pan of milk on the logs. When it was warm, she thrust a mug full into Howl's hands. "Drink it," she said. "Now, what was all this fuss about? Is it this young lady you keep going to see?" Howl sipped the milk dolefully. "Yes," he said. "I left her alone to see if that would make her remember me fondly, and it hasn't. She wasn't sure, even when I last saw her. Now she tells me there's another fellow." He sounded so miserable that Sophie felt quite sorry for him. Now his hair was dry, she noticed guiltily it really was almost pink. "She's the most beautiful girl there ever was in these parts," Hal went on mournfully. "I love her so dearly, but she scorns my deep devotion and gets sorry for another fellow. How can she have another fellow after all this attention I've given her? They usually get rid of the other fellows as soon as I come along." Sophie's sympathy shrank quite sharply. It occurred to her that if Howl could cover himself with green slime so easily, then he could just as easily turn his hair the proper color. "Then why don't you feed the girl a love potion and get it over with?" she said. "Oh, no," said Howl. "That's not playing the game. That would spoil all the fun." Sophie's sympathy shrank again. "A game, was it?" "Don't you ever give a thought for the poor girl?" she snapped. Howl finished the milk and glazed into the mug with a sentimental smile. "I think of her all the time," he said. "Lovely, lovely Letty Hatter." Sophie's sympathy went for good, with a sharp bang. A good deal of anxiety took its place. "Oh, Martha," she thought, "you have been busy. So it wasn't anyone in Cesaria's that you were talking about." And that's chapter 6. I'm going to take a break real quick to drink some of my coffee. It ended up a bit sweeter than I'd prefer. I think there's a bit much lavender in there. Stretch break. Okay. Chapter 7, in which a scarecrow prevents Sophie from leaving the castle. Only a particularly bad attack of aches and pains prevented Sophie from setting out for market shipping that evening. But the drizzle in Porthaven had got into her bones. She lay in her cubbyhole and ached and worried about Martha. It might not have been so bad, she thought. She only had to tell Martha that the suitor that she was not sure about was none other than Wizard Howl. That would scare Martha off. And she would tell Martha that the way to scare Howl off was to announce that she was in love with him, and then perhaps threaten him with aunts. Sophie was still creaking when she got up the next morning. "Curse the Witch of the Waste," she muttered to her stick as she got it out. ready to leave. She could hear Howl singing in the bathroom as if he had never had a tantrum in his life. She tiptoed to the door as fast as she could hobble. Howl, of course, came out of the bathroom before she reached it. Sophie looked at him sourly. He was all spruce and dashings, scented gently with apple blossom. The sunlight from the window dazzled off his gray and scarlet suit and made a faintly pink halo of his hair. "I think my hair looks rather good this color," he said. "Do you indeed?" grumbled Sophie. "It goes with this suit," said Howl. "You have quite a touch with your needle, don't you? You've given this suit more style somehow." "Huh," said Sophie. Howl stopped with his hand on the knob above the door. "Aches and pains troubling you," he said, "or has something annoyed you?" "Annoyed?" said Sophie. "Why should I be annoyed? Someone only filled the castle with rotten aspic and deafened everyone in Port Haven and scared Calcifer to a cinder and broke a few hundred hearts. Why should that annoy me? Why should that annoy me?" Howl laughed. "I apologize," he said, turning the knob red down. "The king wants to see me today. I shall probably be kicking in my heels in the palace until evening. But I can do something for your rheumatism when I get back. Don't forget to tell Michael that I left a spell for him on the bench." He smiled sunnily at Sophie and stepped out among the spires of Kingsbury. "And you think that makes it all right," Sophie growled as the door shut. The smile had mollified her. "That smile works on me. It's no wonder poor Martha doesn't know her own mind," she muttered. I need another log before you go," Calcifer reminded her. Sophie hobbled to drop another log onto the grate. Then she set off to the door again. But here Michael came running downstairs and snatched the remains of the loaf off the bench as he ran to the door. "You don't mind, do you?" he said in an agitated way. "I'll bring a fresh loaf when I come back. I've got something very urgent to see to today. But I'll be back by evening. If the sea captain calls for his..." Oh? Oh, now the rain is too loud? And skipping a little. I'll turn it down a bit more. If it's skipping, and it's not skipping for anyone else, that might just be a connection thing. 'Cause you're at work right now, aren't you? I don't think I necessarily trust your workplace's Wi-Fi. Oh, you're home now. Welcome back. Okay, I turned it down a bit more. How's that? Oh my gosh, I totally meant to ask you for more seashells when you went to work. I've been making little seashell bunnies. They're really cute. I'll have to show you guys later. Okay. If that sounds alright, then I'm gonna go ahead and keep reading. Um, you guys let me know if it ever... Oh. Oh, heck yeah, more shells. I can hear it just a bit. Wait, can you not hear me over the rain? Like, if I'm talking right now, you can hear me over the rain, right? Oh, okay. I hope it's fine now. Oh, okay, cool, 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 cool. Alright, I'm gonna continue on with the book then. Michael came running downstairs and snatched the remains of a loaf off the bench as he ran to the door. You don't mind, do you? He said in an agitated way. I'll bring a fresh loaf when I come back. I've got something very urgent to see to today, but I'll be back by evening. If the sea captain calls for his wind spell, it's on the end of the bench, clearly labeled. He turned the doorknob, green downward, and jumped out onto the windy hillside. Loaf clutched to his stomach. Loaf clutched to his stomach. See you! He shouted as the castle trundled away past him and the door slammed. Botheration, said Sophie. Calcifer, how does a person open the door when there's no one inside the castle? I'll open it for you, or Michael. Hal does it himself, said Calcifer. No one would be locked out, and so no one would be locked out when Sophie left. She was not at all sure she would be coming back, but she did not. But she did not intend to tell. But she did not intend to tell Calcifer. She gave Michael time to get well on the way to wherever he was going, and then set off for the door again. This time, Calcifer stopped her. If you're going to be away long, he said, you might leave some logs where I can reach them. Can you pick up logs? Sophie asked, intrigued in spite of her impatience. For answer, Sophie stretched out a blue arm-shaped flame, divided into green finger-like flames at the end. It was not very long, nor did it look very strong. See, I can almost reach the hearth, he said proudly. Sophie stacked a pile of logs in front of the grate so that Calcifer could at least reach the top one. You're not going to burn them until you've got them in the you're not to burn them until you've got them in the grate, she warned him, and she set off for the door yet again. This time somebody knocked on it before she got there. It was one of those days, Sophie thought. It must be the sea captain. She put her hand to the knob, blew down. No, it's the castle door, Calcifer said. But I'm not sure. Then it was Michael back for some reason. Sophie thought as she opened the door. A turnip face leered at her. She smelled mildew. Against the wide blue sky, a ragged arm ending in the stump of a stick wheeled around and tried to paw at her. It was a scarecrow. It was only made of sticks and rags, but it was alive, and it was trying to come in. Calcifer! Sophie screamed. Make this castle go faster! The stone blocks round the doorway crunched and grated. The green-brown moorland was suddenly rushing past. The scarecrow's stick arm thumped on the door, and then went scraping along the wall of the castle as the castle left it behind. It wheeled its other arm round and seemed to try to clutch at the stonework. It meant to get this castle if it could. Sophie slammed the door shut. This, she thought, showed just how stupid it was for an eldest child to try to seek her fortune. That was the scarecrow she had propped in the hedge on her way to the castle. She had made jokes to it. Now, as if her jokes had brought it to evil life, it had followed her all the way here and tried to paw at her face. She ran to the window to see if the thing was still trying to get to the castle. Of course, all she could see was a sunny day in Port Haven, with dozens of sails going up a dozen masts beyond the roofs opposite, and a cloud of seagulls circling in the blue sky. That's the difficulty of being in several places at once, Sophie said to the human skull on the bench. Then, all at once, she discovered the real drawback to being an old woman. Her heart gave a leap and then a little stutter, and then it seemed to be trying to bang its way out of her chest. It hurt. She shook all over and her knees trembled. She rather thought she might be dying. It was all she could do to get to the chair by the hearth. She sat there panting. She sat. They used the wrong there! It is so wild finding typos in published books. I have never picked up on this before, but they spell there like Their, as in like the panting belongs to someone, which doesn't really make sense. Um, because the sentence is like she sat there panting, clutching her chest, which sounds fine when I say it out loud, but it's like the there that you're thinking of is the There, right? Anyway, is something the matter? Calcifer asked. Yes, my heart. There's a scarecrow at the door, she gasped. What is a scarecrow? What is a scarecrow to do with your heart? Calcifer asked. It was trying it was trying to get in here. It gave me a terrible fright, and my heart. You wouldn't understand, you silly young demon, Sophie panted. You you haven't got a heart. Yes, I have. Yes, I have, Calcifer said, as proudly as he had revealed his arm. Down in the glowing part under the logs. And don't call me young. I'm a good million years older than you are. Can I reduce the speed? Can I reduce at the speed of the castle now? Only if the scarecrow's gone, said Sophie. Has it? I can't tell. I can't tell, said Calcifer. It's not flesh and blood, you see. I told you I couldn't really see outside. Sophie got up and dragged herself. Sophie got up and dragged herself to the door again, feeling ill. She opened it slowly and cautiously. Green steepness, rocks, and purple slopes whirled past, making her feel dizzy. But she took a grip on the door frame and leaned out to look along the wall to the moorland where they were leaving behind. The scarecrow was about 50 yards to the rear. It was hopping from clump to heather clump with a sinister sort of valiance, holding its fluttering stick arms at an angle to balance it on the hillside. As Sophie watched, the castle left it further behind. It was slow, but it was still following. She shut the door. It's still there, she said. Hopping after us. Go faster. But that upsets all my calculations, Calcifer explained. I was aiming to circle the hills and get back to where Michael left us in time to pick him up this evening. Then go twice as fast and circle the hills twice, as long as you leave that horrible thing behind, said Sophie. What a fuss, Calcifer grumbled. But he increased the castle's speed. Sophie could actually, for the first time, feel it rumbling around her as she sat huddled in her chair, wondering if she was dying. She did not want to die yet, before she had talked to Martha. As the day went on, everything in the castle began to jiggle with its speed. Bottles chinked, the skull clattered on the bench. Sophie could hear things falling off the shelf in the bathroom and splashing into the bath where Howl's blue and silver suit was still soaking. She began to feel a little better. She dragged herself to the door again and looked out. With her hair flying in the wind, the ground was streaking past underneath. The hills seemed to be spinning slowly as the castle sped across them. The grinding and rumbling nearly deafened her, and smoke was puffing out behind in blast. But the scarecrow was a tiny black dot on the distant slope by then. Next time she looked, it was out of sight entirely. Good, then I shall stop for the night, said Calcifer. That was quite a strain. The rumbling died away. Things stopped jiggling. Calcifer went to sleep, in the way that fires do, sinking among the logs until they were rosy cinders plated with white ash, with only the hint of blue and green deep underneath. Sophie felt quite spry again by then. She went and finished six packets, and fished 6 packets and a bottle out of the slimy water in the bath. The packets were soaked. She did not dare leave them that way after yesterday. So she laid them on the floor very cautiously, sprinkled them with the stuff labeled drying power. They were dry almost instantly. This was encouraging. Sophie let the water out of the bath and tried the powder on Howell's suit. That was dried too. It was still stained green and rather smaller than it had been before, but it cheered Sophie up to find that she could put at least something right. She felt cheerful enough to busy herself getting supper. She bundled everything on the bench into a heap round the skull at one end and began chopping onions. At least your eyes don't water, my friend, she told the skull. Count your blessings. The door sprang open. Sophie nearly cut herself in fright, thinking it was the scarecrow again. But it was Michael. He burst jubilantly. Maybe we should have a word of the week kind of thing, you know? I'm making it jubilantly this week, if we decide to make that like a thing. He dumped a loaf, a pie, and a pink and white striped box on top of the onions. Then he seized Sophie around her skinny waist and danced her around the room. It's all right, he shouted joyfully. Sophie hopped and stumbled out of the way of Michael's boots. Steady, steady, she gasped, giddily trying to hold the knife where it could not cut either of them. What is all right? Letty loves me, Michael shouted, dancing her almost into the bathroom and then almost in the hearth. She's never seen Howl. It was all a mistake. He spun them both round in the middle of the room. Will you let go of me before this knife cuts one of us? Sophie squawked, and perhaps explain a little. I'm not shouting weep. Michael shouts it. I think my roommate's still asleep. I don't want to shout weep. He whirled Sophie to the chair and dumped her into it, where she sat gasping. Last night I'd wish you dyed his hair blue, he said. I don't mind now. When Hal said Letty had her, I thought of dyeing him blue myself. You can see the way he talks. I knew he was going to drop this girl just like all the others, as soon as he got her to love him. And when I thought it was my Letty, Anyway, you know he said there was another fellow, and I thought that was me, so I tore down to Market Shipping today, and it was all right. Hal must be after some other girl with the same name. Letty's never even seen him. Let's get this straight, Sophie said dizzily. We are talking about the Letty Hatter who works in Cesari's pastry shop, aren't we? Of course we are, Michael said jubilantly. I've loved her ever since she started working there. And I almost couldn't believe it when she said she loved me. She has hundreds of admirers. I wouldn't have been surprised if Hal was one of them. I'm so relieved. I got you a cake from Cesari's to celebrate. Where did I put it? Oh, here it is. He thrust the pink and white box at Sophie, and the onion fell off it onto her lap. How old are you, my child? Sophie asked. 15 last May Day, said Michael. Calcifer sent fireworks out from the castle. Didn't you, Calcifer? Oh, he's already asleep. You're probably thinking I'm too young to be engaged. I've still got 3 years of my apprenticeship to run. And Letty's even longer. But we promised one another, and we don't mind waiting. Then Michael was about the right age for Martha, Sophie thought. And she knew by now he was a nice, steady lad with a career as a wizard ahead of him. Bless Martha's heart. When she thought back to that bewildering May Day, she realized that Michael had been one of that shouting group leaning on the counter in front of Martha. But Howl had been outside in Market Square. Are you sure that Letty was telling the truth about Howl? She asked anxiously. Positive, said Michael. I know when she's lying. She stops twiddling her thumbs. She does too, said Sophie, chuckling. How do you know? Michael asked in surprise. Because she's my sister's granddaughter, said Sophie. And as a small girl, she was not always terribly truthful. But she's quite young, and well, I suppose she changes as she grows. May not look quite the same in a year or so. Neither will I, said Michael. People our age change all the time. It won't worry us. She'll still be Letty. In a manner of speaking, Sophie thought. But suppose she was telling the truth, she went on anxiously, and she just knew Howl under a foul foul. She knew Howl under a foul. She knew Howl under a false name. Don't worry, I thought of that, said Michael. I described Howl. You must admit he's pretty recognizable, and she hadn't really seen him or his wretched guitar. I didn't even have to tell her that he doesn't know how to play the thing. Did I already make the joke about Howl being the kind of person who would who would bring the guitar to a campfire, but then he wouldn't even play it. He would just sit there like strumming like one chord on the guitar at the campfire. I love this man. Uh That's a relief, Sophie said, lying stiffly back in her chair. And it certainly was a relief about Martha. But it was not much of a relief because Sophie was positive that the only other Letty Hatter in the district was the real one. If there had been another, someone would have to come into the hat shop and gossiped. Then someone would have come into the hat shop and gossiped about it. It sounded like strong-minded Letty not giving in to Howl. What worried Sophie was that Letty had told Howl her real name. She might not be sure about him, but she liked him enough to trust him with an important secret like that. Don't look so anxious, Michael laughed, leaning onto the back of the chair. Have a look at the cake I brought you. Michael's so sweet. As Sophie started opening the box, it dawned on her that Michael had gone from seeing her as a natural disaster to actually liking her. She was so pleased and grateful that she decided to tell Michael the whole truth about Letty and Martha herself, too. It was only fair to let him know the sort of family he meant to marry into. The box came open. It was Cesari's most luscious cake, covered in cream and cherries and little curls of chocolate. Oh, said Sophie. The square knob over the door clicked round the red blob down of its own accord, and Hal came in. What a marvelous cake. My favorite kind, he said. Where did you get it? I called in at Cesari's, Michael said in a sheepish, self-conscious way. Sophie looked up at Hal. Something was always going to interrupt her when she decided to say she was under a spell. Even a wizard, it seemed. It looks worth the walk, Hal said, inspecting the cake. I've heard Cesari's is better than any of the cake shops in Kingsbury. Stupid of me to have never been in the place. And is that a pie I see on the bench? He went over to look. Pie and a bed of raw onions. Human skull looking put upon. He picked up the skull and knocked an onion ring out of its eye socket. I see Sophie has been busy again. Couldn't you have restrained her, my friend? The skull yattered its teeth at him. Hal looked startled and put it down rather hastily. Is something the matter? Michael asked. He seemed to know the signs. There is, Howl said. I shall have to find someone to blacken my name to the king. Was there something wrong with the wagon spell? Said Michael. No, it worked perfectly. That's the trouble, Howl said, restlessly twiddling an onion ring in one finger. The king's trying to pin me down to do something else now. Calcifer, if we're not very careful, he's going to appoint me the royal magician. Calcifer did not answer. Hal roved back to the fireside and realized Calcifer was asleep. Wake him up, Michael, he said. I need to consult him. Michael threw 2 logs on Calcifer and called him. Nothing happened, apart from a thin spire of smoke. Calcifer! Hal shouted. That did no good either. That did no good either. Howl gave Michael a mystified look and picked up the poker, which was something Sophie had never seen him do before. Sorry, Calcifer, he said, jabbing it underneath the unburned logs. Wake up! One thick black cloud of smoke rolled up and stopped. Go away, Calcifer grunted. I'm tired. At this, Howl looked thoroughly alarmed. What's wrong with him? I've never seen him like this before. I think it was the scarecrow, Sophie said. Howl swiveled round on his knees and leveled his glass marble eyes at her. What have you done now? He went on staring while Sophie explained. A scarecrow? He said. Calcifer agreed to speed up the castle because of a scarecrow? Dear Sophie, please do tell me how you bully a fire demon into being that obliging. I'd dearly love to know. I didn't bully him, said Sophie. It gave me a turn, and he was sorry for me. It gave her a turn, and Calcifer was sorry for her, Hal repeated. My good Sophie, Calcifer is never sorry for anyone. Anyway, I hope you enjoy raw onions and cold pie for your supper, because you've almost put Calcifer out. There's the cake, Michael said, trying to make peace. The food did seem to improve Howl's temper, though he kept casting anxious looks at the unburning logs in the hearth all the time they were eating. The pie was good cold, and the onions were quite tasty when she soaked them in vinegar. The cake was superb. While they were eating, Michael risked asking Howl what the king had wanted. Nothing definite just yet, Howl said gloomily. But he was sounding me out about his brother, quite ominously. Apparently they had a good old argument before Prince Justin stormed off, and people are talking. The king obviously wanted me to volunteer to go look for his brother, and like the fool, I went and said I didn't think Wizard Solomon was dead, and that made matters worse. Why do you want to slither out of looking for the prince? Sophie demanded. Don't you think you can find him? Rude as well as a bully, aren't you? Howl said. He'd still not forgiven her about Calcifer. I want to get out of it because I know I can find him. If you must know, Justin was great buddies with Solomon, and the argument was because he told the king he was going to go look for him. He didn't think the king should have sent Solomon to the waste in the first place. Now even you must know that there is a certain lady in the waste who is very bad news. She promised to fry me alive last year, and she sent a curse out after me that I've only avoided so far because I have had the sense to give her a false name. Sophie was almost awed. You mean you jilted the Witch of the Waste? Jilted is another one I don't know very well. I mean, I can guess what it means, but... Hal cut himself another lump of cake, looking sad and honorable. That is not the way to put it. I admit I thought I was fond of her for a time. She is in some ways a very sad lady, very unloved. Every man in Ingary is scared stiff of her. You ought to know how that feels, Sophie dear. Sophie's mouth opened in utter indignation. Michael said quickly, Do you think we should move the castle? That's why you invented it, wasn't it? That depends on Calcifer. Hal looked over his shoulder at the barely smoking logs again. I must say, if I think the king and the witch both after me, I get a craving for planting the castle on a nice frowning rock 1,000 miles away. Michael obviously wished he had not spoken. Sophie could see he was thinking that 1,000 miles away was a terribly long way from Martha. But what happens to your Letty Hatter? She said to Howl. If you up and move. I expect that will be all over by then, Howl said absently. But if I could only think of a way to get that king off my back. I know! He lifted his fork and with a melting hunk of cream and cake in it and pointed it at Sophie. You can blacken my name to the king. You can pretend to be my old mother and plead for your blue-eyed boy. He gave Sophie a smile which had no doubt charmed the Witch of the Waste and possibly Letty too. Firing it along the fork, across the cream, straight into Sophie's eyes dazzlingly. If you can bully Calcifer, the king should give you no trouble at all. Sophie stared through the dazzle and said nothing. This, she thought, was where she slithered out. She was leaving. It was too bad about Calcifer's contract. She had had enough of Howl. First green slime, then gathering at her then glaring at her for something Calcifer had done quite freely, and now this. Tomorrow she would slip off to upper folding and tell Letty all about it. And that's the end of chapter 7. And, I don't know if I want to go one more chapter. I am pretty eepy. I've been fumbling my words a lot. The coffee's okay. It's still a little sweet. Not that I've done anything to change it in the past half hour since I took a sip. Okay, this next chapter is... It's about 20 pages. Yeah, we'll do one more chapter. Chapter 8, in which Sophie leaves the castle in several directions at once. To Sophie's relief, Calcifer blazed up bright and cheerful next morning. If she had not had enough of Howl, she would have been almost touched by how glad Calcifer was to see Calcifer. "I thought she'd done for you, you old ball of gas," Howl said, kneeling at the hearth, with his sleeve trailing in the ash. I was only tired, Calcifer said. "There was some kind of drag on the castle. I've never taken it that fast before." "Well, don't let her make you do it again," said Howl. He stood up, gracefully brushing ash off his gray and scarlet suit. "Make a start on that spell today, Michael. And if anyone comes from the king, I'm away on urgent private business until tomorrow. I'm going to see Letty, but you needn't tell him that." He picked up his guitar and opened the door with the knob grained down onto the wide, cloudy hills. The scarecrow was there again. When Howl opened the door, it pitched sideways across him with his turnip face in his chest. The guitar uttered an awful twang. Sophie gave a faint squawk of terror and hung onto the chair. One of the scarecrow's stick arms was scraping stiffly around to get a purchase on the door. From the way that Howl's feet were braced, it was clear he was being shoved quite hard. There was no doubt the thing was determined to get into the castle. Calcifer's blue face leaned out of the grate. Michael stood shock still beyond. "There really is a scarecrow," they both said. "Oh, is there? Do tell!" Howl panted. He got one foot up against the doorframe and heaved. The scarecrow flew lumpishly away backward, to land with a light rustle in the heather some yards off. It sprang up instantly and came hopping towards the castle again. Howl hurriedly laid the guitar on the doorstep and jumped down to meet it. "No, you don't, my friend," he said with one hand out. "Go back to where you came from." He walked forward slowly, still with his hand out. The scarecrow retreated a little, hopping slowly and warily backward. When Howl stopped, the scarecrow stopped too, with its one leg planted in the heather, and its ragged arms tilting it this way and that like a person sparing for an opening. The rags fluttering on its arms seemed a mad imitation of Howl's sleeves. "So you won't go," Howl said, and the turnip head slowly moved from side to side. "No." "I'm afraid you'll have to," Howl said. "You scare Sophie, and there's no knowing what she'll do when she's scared. Come to think of it, you scare me too." Howl's arms moved heavily, as if he was lifting a large weight, until they were raised above his head. He shouted a strange word, which was half hidden in a crack of sudden thunder, and the scarecrow went soaring away. See, when I read that, I think of that... There's that one Vine where the car is going down, and it's like dark out, and he hits a deer, which I feel awful about. Like, that sucks. That's not great. But then the way the deer just, like, starts soaring through the sky is more funny than it should be. Like, this is not something I should be laughing about because hitting a deer is dangerous for both the people in the car and and the deer. Like, obviously the deer isn't going to survive that. Both situations suck. So I feel like I shouldn't laugh at just seeing the deer just go soaring. Yeah, I really shouldn't. Um, but that's just kind of what this scene makes me think of. You know, I can just see the scarecrow like blasting off again, like shoo, you know. Up and backward it went, rags fluttering, arms wheeling in protest, up and out and on, until it was a soaring speck in the sky, then a vanishing point in the clouds, and then not even to be seen at all. So it really is just Team Rocket blasting off again. God bless. Howl lowered his arms and came back to the doorway, mopping his face in the back of his hand. I take back my harsh words, Sophie, he said, panting. That thing was alarming. It may have been dragging the castle back all yesterday. It had some of the strongest magic I've met. Whatever it was, all that was left, whatever it was, all that was left of the last person you cleaned for. Sophie gave a weak little cackle of laughter. Her heart was behaving badly again. So Hal realized something was wrong with her. He jumped indoors across his guitar and took a hold of her elbow and sat her on the chair. Take it easy now. Something happened between Howl and Calcifer then. Sophie felt it, because she was being held by Howl and Calcifer was still leaning out of the grate. Whatever it was, her heart began to behave properly almost at once. Howl looked at Calcifer, shrugged, and turned away to give Michael a whole lot of instructions about making Sophie keep quiet for the rest of the day. Then he picked up the guitar and left at last. I really like this scene, actually. I don't know, I feel like you get to see how close all of them have grown in these past couple of chapters. And that just makes my brain really happy. Like, you get this real cute bonding moment with Sophie and Michael. And then here we get one with, like, Howl and Sophie. You know? Like, Sophie is still very, very on the fence about Howl. She does not like him very much, which is completely fair. But I think Howl cares at least a little bit for Sophie. And I don't know. Just seeing that relationship develop is just very nice. I think it's very cute. Calcifer also cares quite a bit about Sophie. And I think you definitely get to see that quite a bit. There is more foreshadowing here, which I do want to come back to later. I really should be taking notes of stuff like this. Maybe I'll do that with the next book. Sophie lay in the chair and pretended to feel twice as ill as she did. She had to let Howl get out of sight. It was a nuisance that he was going to upper folding as well, but she would walk so much more slowly that she would arrive around the time that he had started back. The important thing was to not meet him on the way. She watched Michael slyly while he spread out the spell and scratched his head over it. She waited until he dragged the big leather books off the shelves and began taking notes in a frantic, depressed sort of way. When he seemed properly absorbed, Sophie muttered several times, "Stuffy in here." Michael took no notice. "Terribly stuffy," Sophie said, getting up and shambling to the door. "Fresh air." She opened the door and climbed out. Calcifer obligingly stopped the castle dead while she did. Sophie landed in the heather and took a look around to get her bearings. The road over the hills to Upper Folding was a sandy line through the heather, just down from the castle. Naturally, Calcifer would not make things inconvenient for Howl. Sophie set off toward it. She felt a little sad. She was going to miss Michael and Calcifer. She was almost at the road when she heard a shouting behind her. Michael came bounding down the hillside after her, with a tall black castle coming bobbling behind him, shredding anxious puffs of smoke from all four turrets. "What are you doing?" Michael said when he caught up. The way he looked at her, Sophie could see he thought the scarecrow had sent her wrong in the head. "I'm perfectly all right," Sophie said indignantly. "I'm going to see my other sister's granddaughter. She's called Letty Hatter, too. Now do you understand?" "Where does she live?" Michael demanded, as if he thought Sophie might not know. "Upper Folding," said Sophie. "But that's over 10 miles away," Michael said. "I promised Howl I'd make you rest. I can't let you go. I told him I wouldn't let you out of my sight." Sophie did not look very kindly on this. Howl thought she was useful now because he wanted her to see the king. Of course he did not want her to leave the castle. "Huh," she said. "Besides," said Michael, slowly grasping the situation, "Hal must have gone to Upper Folding, too." "I'm quite sure he has," said Sophie. "Then you're anxious about this girl if she's your great niece," Michael said, arriving at the point at last. "I see, but I can't let you go." "I'm going," said Sophie. "But if Hal sees you there, he'll be furious," Michael went on, working things out. "Because I promised him, and then he'll be mad at both of us. You ought to rest." Then, when Sophie was almost ready to hit him, he exclaimed, "Wait, there's a pair of 7-league boots in the broom cupboard." He took Sophie by her skinny old wrist and towed her uphill to the waiting castle. She was forced to give little hops in order to catch her feet in the heather. "But," she panted, 7 leagues is 21 miles. I'd be halfway to Porthaven in 2 strides." "No, it's 10.5 miles a step," said Michael. That makes Upper Folding almost exactly. If we take one boot and go together, then I won't be letting you out of my sight, and you won't be doing anything strenuous, and we'll have gotten there before Howl does, so we won't even know we've been. That solves all of our problems beautifully." Michael was so pleased with himself that Sophie did not have the heart to protest. She shrugged and supposed Michael had better find out about the 2 Lettys before they changed looks again. It was more honest this way. But when Michael fetched the boots from the broom cupboard, Sophie began to have doubts. Up to now, she had thought that they were 2 leather buckets that had somehow lost their handles and then gotten a little squished. "You're supposed to put your foot in them, shoe and all," Michael explained, as he carried the 2 heavy bucket-shaped things to the door. "These are the prototypes of the boots that Howl made for the king's army. We managed to get the later ones a bit lighter and more boot-shaped," he said, and Sophie sat on the doorstep, and each put one foot in a boot. "Point yourself towards Upper Folding before you put the boot down," Michael warned her. He and Sophie stood on the foot, which was an ordinary shoe, and carefully swung themselves round to face Upper Folding. "Now tread," said Michael. Zip! The landscape instantly rushed past them so fast it was only a blur, a gray-green blur for the land and blue-gray blur for the sky. The wind of their going tore at Sophie's hair and dragged every wrinkle in her face backward until she thought she would arrive with half of her face behind each ear. The rushing stopped as suddenly as it had begun. Everything was calm and sunny, and they were knee-deep in buttercups in the middle of Upper Folding, in the Upper Folding village common. A cow nearby stared at them. Beyond it, thatched cottage drowsed under trees. Unfortunately, the bucket-like boots were so heavy that Sophie staggered as she landed. "Don't put that foot down!" Michael yelled too late. There was another zipping and blur and more rushing wind, and when it stopped, Sophie found herself right down the Folding Valley, almost into Marsh Folding. "Oh, drat," she said, and hopped carefully around on her shoe and tried again. Zip! Blur! And then she was back in Upper Folding Green again, staggering forward with the weight of the boot. She had a glimpse of Michael diving to catch her, but zip! Blur! "Oh, bother!" wailed Sophie. She was up in the hills again. The crooked black shape of the castle was drifting peacefully nearby. Calcifer amused himself blowing black smoke rings from one turret. Sophie saw that much before her shoe caught in the heather, and she stumbled forward again. Zip! Zip! This time Sophie visited in rapid succession the market square of Market Chipping and the front lawn of a very grand mansion. Blow! She cried. Drat! One word for each place, and she was off again, with her momentum and another zip, right down the end of that alley in a field somewhere. A large red bull raised its ring nose from the grass, thoughtfully lowering its horns. I'm just leaving, my good beast, Sophie cried, hopping herself round frantically. Zip! Back to the mansion. Zip! Back to Market Square. Zip! And there was the castle yet again. She was getting the hang of it. Zip! There was Market Folding. But how do you stop? Zip! Oh, confound it! Sophie cried, almost in marsh folding again. This time she hopped around very carefully and trod with great deliberation. Zip! And unfortunately the boot landed. And fortunately the boot landed in a cow pat, and she sat down with a thump. Michael sprinted up right before Sophie could move and dragged the boot off of her foot. Thank you, Sophie cried breathlessly. There seemed to be no reason why I should ever stop. Sophie's heart pounded a bit as they walked across the common to Miss Fairfax's house, but only in the way that hearts do when they've done a lot rather quickly. She felt very grateful for whatever Howling Calcifer had done. Nice place, Michael remarked as he hid the boots in Miss Fairfax's hedge. Sophie agreed. The house was the biggest in the village. It was thatched with white walls between the black beams, and, as Sophie remembered from visits as a child, you walked up to the porch through the garden, crowded with flowers and humming with bees. Over the porch, a honeysuckle and a white climbing rose were competing as to which could give as And as Sophie remembered from visits as a child, you walk up to the porch through a garden crowded with flowers and humming with bees. Over the porch, a honeysuckle and a white climbing rose were competing as to which could give most work to the bees. It was a perfect, hot summer morning here in Upper Folding. Miss Fairfax answered the door herself. She was one of those plump, comfortable ladies, with swaths of butter-colored hair coiled around her head, who made you feel good with life just to look at her. Sophie felt just the tiniest bit envious of Letty. Miss Fairfax looked from Sophie to Michael. She had seen Sophie last a year ago as a girl of 17, and there was no reason for her to recognize her as an old woman of 90. Good morning to you, she said politely. Sophie sighed. Michael said, This is Letty Hatter's great aunt. I brought her here to see Letty. Oh, I thought that face looked familiar, Miss Fairfax exclaimed. There's quite a family likeness. Do come in. Letty's a bit busy right now, but have some scones and honey while you wait. She opened her door wider. Instantly, a large collie squeezed past Miss Fairfax's skirts, barged between Sophie and Michael, and ran across the nearest flower bed, snapping off flowers right and left. Oh, stop him, Miss Fairfax gasped, flying off in pursuit. I don't want him out just now. There was a minute or so of the helter-skelter chase, in which a dog ran hither and thither, whining in a disturbed way, and Miss Fairfax and Sophie ran after the dog, jumping over flower beds, and getting in one another's way. Michael ran after Sophie, crying, Stop! You'll make yourself ill! Then the dog set off lopping around one corner of the house. Michael realized the way to stop Sophie was to stop the dog, so he made a crosswise dash through the flower beds, plunged around the house right after the dog, and seized it by 2 handfuls of its thick coat just as it reached the orchard at the back. Sophie hobbled up to find Michael pulling the dog away, backward, and making such strange faces at her that she thought at first he was ill. But he jerked his head so often towards the orchard that she realized he was only trying to tell her something. She stuck her face around the corner of the house, expecting to see a swarm of bees. Howl was there with Letty. They were They were in a grove of mossy apple trees in full bloom, with a row of beehives in the distance. Letty sat in the white garden seat. Hal was kneeling on one knee in the grass at his feet. Hal was kneeling on one knee in the grass at her feet, holding one of her hands and looking noble and ardent. Letty was smiling lovingly at him, but the worst of it, as far as Sophie was concerned, was that Letty did not look like Martha at all. She was her own extremely beautiful self. She was wearing a dress of the same kind of pinks and whites as the crowded apple blossoms overhead. Her dark hair trailed in glossy curls over one shoulder, and her eyes shone with devotion for Howl. Sophie brought her head back round the corner and looked with dismay at Michael holding the whimpering collie dog. This collie dog is the same dog that's in the movie, and I believe it's the same one that Sophie rescued in the beginning, but I'm not sure. I'm like 90% sure, but I don't know when they confirm this. He must have a speed spell with him, Michael whispered, equally dismayed. Miss Fairfax caught them, panting and trying to pin back a loose coil of her buttery hair. Bad dog, she said in a fierce whisper to the collie. I'll put a spell on you if you do that once more. The dog blinked and crouched down. Miss Fairfax pointed a stern finger. Into the house. Stay in the house. The collie shook himself free of Michael's hands and slunk round the house again. Thank you so much, Miss Fairfax said to Michael as they followed it. He will keep trying to bite Letty's visitor. He will keep trying to bite Letty's visitor. Inside, she shouted sternly in the front garden as the collie seemed to be thinking of getting round the house and getting to the orchard the other way. The dog gave her a woeful look over its shoulder and crawled dismally indoors through the porch. That dog may have the right idea, Sophie said. Miss Fairfax, do you know who Letty's visitor is? Miss Fairfax chuckled. The wizard Pendragon, or Howl, or whatever he calls himself, she said. But Letty and I don't let on that we know. It amused me when he first turned up, calling himself Sylvester Oak, because I could see that he'd forgotten me, though I hadn't forgotten him. Even though his hair used to be black in his student days, Miss Fairfax by now had her hands folded in front of her and was standing bolt upright, prepared to talk all day, as Sophie had often seen her do before. He was my old tutor's very last pupil, you know, before she retired, when Miss Fairfax was alive. He used to, when Miss Fairfax, when Mr. Fairfax was alive, he used to like me to transport us both to Kingsbury to see a show from time to time. I can manage to very nicely if I take it slowly. And I always used to drop in on old Miss Penstemon while I was there. She likes her old pupils to keep in touch, and one time she introduced this young Hal to us. Oh, she was so proud of him. She taught Wizard Solomon too, you know. And she said Hal was twice as good. But don't you know the reputation Howl has? Michael interrupted. Getting into Miss Fairfax's conversation was rather like getting into a turning skipping rope. You had to choose the exact moment, but once you were in, you were in. Miss Fairfax turned herself slightly to face Michael. Most of it's just talk, to my mind, she said. Michael opened his mouth to say that it was not, but he was in the skipping rope then, and it went on turning. And I said to Letty, here's your big chance, my love. I knew Howl could teach her 20 times more than I could, for I don't mind telling you, Letty's brains go way beyond mine, and she could end up in the same league as the Witch of the Waste, only in a good way. Letty's a good girl, and I'm fond of her. If Miss Penstemon was still teaching, I'd have Letty to her tomorrow. But she isn't. So I said, Letty, here's Wizard Howl courting you, and you could do worse than fall in love with him and let him be your teacher. The pair of you will go far. I don't think Letty was too keen on the idea at first, but she's been softening lately, and today seems to be going beautifully. Here Miss Fairfax paused to beam benevolently at Michael, and Sophie dashed into the skipping rope for a turn. But someone told me Letty was fond of someone else, she said. Sorry for him, you mean, said Miss Fairfax. She lowered her voice. There's a terrible disability there, she whispered suggestively, and it's asking too much of any girl. I told him so. I'm sorry for him myself. I I don't like that. That doesn't make me feel good. I am unfortunately noticing some ableist themes in this book, and it's making me very sad. But I think this book, I do just want to have like a full conversation about like House Moving Castle and how it relates to disability later. But like, when I'm awake and not very much falling asleep. Sophie managed a mystified "Oh?" But it's a fearsomely strong spell. It's very sad, Miss Fairfax wound on. I had to tell him that there's no way that someone of my abilities can break anything that's been put on by the Witch of the Waste. Howl might, but of course he can't ask Howl, can he? Here, Michael, who kept looking nervously to the corner of the house in case Howl came round it and discovered them. Oh? What was that noise? Oh, hey! Thank you for the follow. Aw. Good morning. Hi, hello, welcome. Good morning. You just wake up. I hope I haven't been too loud. Oh my god. Also, guys, this is my roommate Kai. He does art on Twitter and Instagram under the same name, and you should go check him out. Uh, yeah, he's very neat. I like his artwork. He doesn't like coloring. He just likes line work though, which is incorrect. Coloring is the best part. Line work sucks, and I will die on this hill. Anyway. No. No. I have like such an unsteady hand that I have to like sit here and just like meticulously draw all the lines or else they'll end up like super shaky. It's ugh. Anyway. Where was I? Here Michael, who kept looking nervously to the corner of the house in case Howl came round it and discovered them, managed to trample through the skipping rope and stop it by saying, I think we'd better be going. Are you sure you won't come in for a taste of mine honey? Asked Miss Fairfax. I use it in nearly all my spells, you know. And she was off again, this time about the magical properties of honey. My Michael and Sophie walked purposely down the path to the gate, and Miss Fairfax drifted behind them, talking away and sorrowfully straightening plants that the dog had bent as she talked. Sophie, meanwhile, racked her brains for a way to find out how Miss Fairfax knew Letty was Letty without upsetting Michael. Miss Fairfax paused to gasp a bit as she heaved a large lupine upright. Sophie took the plunge. Miss Fairfax, wasn't it my niece Martha who was supposed to come to you? Naughty girls, Miss Fairfax said, smiling and shaking her head as she emerged from the lupine. As if I wouldn't recognize one of my own honey-based spells. But, as I said to her at the time, I'm not one to keep anyone against their will, and I'd always rather teach someone who wants to learn. Only, I said to her, I'll have no pretense here. You stay as your own self or not at all, and it's worked out very happily, as you see. Are you sure you won't stay and ask her for yourself? I think we'd better go, Sophie said. We have to get back, Michael added, with another nervous look around the orchard. He collected his 7-league boots from the hedge and set one down inside the gate for Sophie. And I'm going to hold on to you this time, he said. Miss Fairfax leaned over her gate while Sophie inserted her foot into the boot. 7 leaguers, she said. Would you believe I've not seen any of those for years? Very useful things for someone your age. I wouldn't mind a I wouldn't mind a pair of the, I wouldn't mind a pair myself these days. So it's So it's you Letty inherits her witchcraft from, is it? Not that it necessarily runs in families, but as often as not. Michael took hold of Sophie's arm and pulled. Both boots came down, and the rest of Miss Fairfax's talk vanished in the rush of air. Next moment, Michael had to brace his feet in order not to collide with the castle. The door was open. Inside, Calcifer was roaring, "Porthaven door! Someone's been banging on it since you left." Frick, Calcifer's voice. "Porthaven door! Someone's been banging on it ever since you left." And that's the end of that chapter. Oh, yay! We got through all the chapters that I wanted to get through. Okay. Yeah, I'm a very EP man. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna end stream here. Thank you guys all for coming. I really appreciate it. And I love seeing you guys here. Yeah. Thank you, Mir. Yeah. So I'll see you guys tomorrow for the art stream. We have that at 4. Um, and I haven't decided exactly what I want to draw. I'm kind of conflicted on drawing more like house moving castle stuff, or if I want to do like drawing my cats as people, because I think that would be really fun and like a fun kind of um like just exercise in character design. Anyway, I'm gonna find somebody for you guys to raid. Let's see. We're gonna go with Ooh, okay, this one looks interesting. This one is Hotel Dusk Room 215, and they're a VTuber named, I can't pronounce this, but it's like Dewey Lamb. Anyway, so I'm gonna go ahead and send you guys over there. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I hope you guys have a great day. Bye.